Hello, and welcome to this online event on how can Africa adapt to climate change. My name is Kathryn Hochstetler, and I'm a professor and head of department in the Department of International Development at the London School of Economics. This event we're participating in today is part of the Africa Talks event series, which brings together high-profile and prestigious voices from the African continent and is hosted by the Faraz Lajli Institute for Africa, also at the LSE. The Institute focuses on engagement with Africa through cutting-edge research, teaching, and public events, strengthening LSE's long-term commitment with Africa, long-term commitment to placing Africa at the heart of understandings and debates on global issues. Today's event, of course, takes place during the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, the COP26. In fact, one of our original speakers, Dr. Juliet Biao, is unable to join us because she has unexpected obligations at the COP. So instead of speaking to us today on Africa's role in the climate negotiations, she's actually engaging in negotiating those relationships there. Rising temperatures, changing rain patterns, and more extreme weather are major threats to Africa's socioeconomic development, its health, food and water provision, and security. Numerous reports from international organizations warn that climate trends will upend ways of life with grave human cost, hitting the most vulnerable the hardest. Recent devastating floods, droughts, cyclones, and locust plagues have been exacerbated by environmental changes, and adaptation by African countries is urgent to create sustainable livelihoods. This event invites leading global experts to discuss how Africa can best adapt to climate change. I'm very pleased that we have such a distinguished group of speakers who will address this question. After I introduce them, each will offer a brief opening statement to be followed by a discussion that I will facilitate. We will also save time for your questions, which you can write at any point into the Q&A. I'm going to be introducing the speakers in the order in which they'll speak, and I'm going to introduce them all at once rather than interrupting the flow. So let me begin then with Dr. Richard Munang, who is going to start us off today. He's currently the Africa Regional Climate Change Coordinator at the UN Environment Program, UNEP, and is replacing his colleague, Dr. Biao, for us today. Dr. Munang is responsible for guiding the implementation of UNEP's Climate Resilient Development Strategy at both national and regional levels to ensure human well-being through coordinating implementation of diverse projects in adaptation and also mitigation. He has won many awards, including the Africa Green Champion Award 2020, the African Environmental Hero Award 2016, and the UNEP 2016 highest recognition Baobab Award for Program Innovation. The author of the book, Making Africa Work Through the Power of Innovative Volunteerism. He holds a PhD in Environmental Change and Policy from the University of Nottingham and an executive certificate in Climate Change and Energy Policy from the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. Welcome today, Dr. Munang. We're also very pleased to have with us Professor Chris Gordon, who will follow Dr. Munang. And Professor Chris Gordon is the founding director of the Institute for Environment and Sanitation Studies at the University of Ghana. His research interests include climate change policy, management of mangroves and coastal systems, and use of ecosystem-based approaches to adaptation, sanitation, and waste management. He has been an active member of the UNEP WASP Steering Committee on Climate Change and the Earth Commission. He has served as Executive Vice President of the International Society of Limnology, as well as Vice President of Wetlands International. He has contributed to the development of several policy documents for the Ghanan government, such as climate change and the master plan, biodiversity, science, technology, and innovation, water, buffer zone, and the State of the Environment Report 2016. Chris Gordon has won several awards, including the Order of the Volta, awarded by the government of Ghana for service in development, education, and research. We're also joined today by Timo Leiter, who's at the COP and is trying to find a quiet place to broadcast from. So he will hopefully be with us by the time his turn to talk comes along. But Timo Leiter is a researcher on climate change adaptation and international development at the LSE Grantham Institute. He's been advising several governments on adaptation policy. From 2017 to 2019, Timo was the head of adaptation support provided by Germany's Technical Development Cooperation, GIZ, to the Tanzanian government. He is a regular speaker at UNFCCC events, a lead author of the UNEP's annual Adaptation Gap Report, and a contributing author to the upcoming volume on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability of the IPCC's sixth assessment report. Finally, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Svenja Serminski, who's the head of adaptation research at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment, part of the London School of Economics and Political Science. She oversees social science research projects on climate adaptation, resilience, and disaster risk finance. She's a contributing author to the IPCC and the EU Science for Disaster Risk Management Report, and lead author of the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment. Svenja works closely with industry and policymakers and was appointed visiting academic at the Bank of England in 2015 to work on the regulator's first report on climate change in the insurance industry. She is chair of the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, MCII, and prior to joining LSE in 2010, Svenja spent more than 10 years in the insurance industry working on climate and risk perspectives. So brings a couple of different risk management, brings a couple of different perspectives to her role. Dr. Serminski is associate principal at Vivid Economics and associate at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and has a visiting teaching role on risk governance at the Technical University of Darmstadt. Dr. Serminski received her PhD in political science from Hamburg University for her work on climate change in the insurance industry. So as you can see, we really do have a really terrific group of speakers for us today. And I will now yield the floor to Dr. Richard Munang, who will start us off today with some thoughts on how can Africa adapt to climate change. Dr. Munang, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Kathryn, and to all those who are listening in, and the organizers of this African talk and all protocols observed. It's a great pleasure to be here and accept greetings from Dr. Juliet Beer from the UNEP Environment Program Africa Office. I'll start off with this African proverb, which goes that seeing is different from being told. This proverb is an implicit reminder that the reality of climate change is self-evident. From heat waves, floods, wildfires, and droughts spanning every continent globally, the occurrences we are seeing leave no doubt that the number of climate-related disasters has tripled in the last 30 years. And this has occurred at a staggering cost above $3 trillion to the global economy. But even more alarming is the disproportionate manifestation of these effects, with significantly more severe impacts on the African continent. While Africa has contributed least to the changing climate, it is responsible for only 2 to 4% of global emissions. It suffers disproportionate impacts. Some parts of Africa are already heating twice as fast as the rest of the globe. The resultant biophysical effects further the escalation of socioeconomic misery, which is already at a breaking point for many. From 257 million people who are experiencing hunger, to over 60 million malnourished children, to over 12 million young people who remain disenfranchised in employment, to a surge in vector-borne diseases like malaria as a result of temperature and precipitation variability. Despite all this, another variable, the COVID-19 global pandemic, has only compounded this risk. Pulling out of this predicament centers on one word: socioeconomics. Meaningful climate adaptation in Africa is one that simultaneously accelerates the realization of socioeconomic priorities amidst the devastation of both climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. The 2020 UNEP Adaptation Gap Report and the Emissions Gap Report have called for a green pandemic recovery, which implies a reprioritization of investments to target trajectories that lower emissions while simultaneously unlocking socioeconomic priorities. This approach will unlock income opportunities to drive post-COVID-19 recovery and cut emissions by up to 25% in just 9 years from today. The UNEP Adaptation Gap Report assures us that a 1.8 trillion investment in adaptation measures globally would bring a return of 7.1 trillion in avoided costs and other benefits. In Africa and other developing regions, an investment of $800 million on adaptation And nature-based solutions would result in benefit of $3 billion to 16 billion annually. From talk to action is what we must be able to do, because the cruise of this discussion today is one that we should be able to know that adaptation must be one that can be realized at the community levels, must be one that can ensure socio-economic opportunities created for people. And as a result of this, I will leave you with the following enablers as the basis of implementing adaptation at both regional and global levels. The first is, for Africa, we must complement adaptation with mitigation. Article 7.1 of the Paris Climate Change Agreement is a stark reminder that to be adequate, the level of adaptation efforts must be at par with the damage being caused by emissions. The IPCC SIT assessment report and the 2021 UNEP emissions gap report underscore the narrowing window of opportunity. But how do we reconcile this provision for a negligible emitter like Africa? The socio-economic lens is the pathway. Adaptation actions need to be undertaken within a firm focus of enhancing ecological resilience and unlocking tangible income opportunities for communities. And for this to occur, mitigation needs to be a complementary action undertaken simultaneously. For example, in agriculture, a highly vulnerable sector yet that employs over 60% of the continent's population, up to 48 billion worth of food is lost each and every year as post-harvest losses, meaning the ecosystem goods and services expended in producing this food are wasted, further depleting and minimizing the ability of these ecosystems to buffer against the changing climate effects, alongside the loss of income opportunities as yields decline. However, decentralizing affordable clean energy solutions to power preservation and reverse these post-harvest losses will enhance food security, will enhance incomes, will enhance more money in more pockets. It will minimize the need to open up more lands and preserve natural ecosystems to ensure the ability to adapt to climate change remains intact. For example, at the height of COVID-19, control measures that necessitated the closure of open markets, informal sector food markets, they mean a significant loss because many people could not be able to add value. However, the decentralization of a simple climate action solution of solar dryers among informal sector helped them dehydrate their unsold stock and converted them to dry products sold in the market. The result we saw were up to 30 times increase in revenues and a reduction of losses. It therefore means that complementing adaptation and mitigation in the way that actually drives socio-economic opportunities is important. The second is we must turn NDCs into investment plans. Africa and other developing regions need more than 70 billion to adapt to the changing climate. As glaring as this gap is, Africa already invests in adaptation at a rate of 2% of her GDP. But the big question is how the region can maximize these investments for impact among the most vulnerable. The answer is by turning policy commitments such as the NDCs into investment plans that attract implementation investments. It is a big irony sometimes why over 90% of African countries have ratified their NDCs and estimated 70% have not translated these NDCs into concrete plans that are attractive for implementation investment. It is a missed opportunity because the implementation cannot happen without attracting implementation investments. Through UNEP's work, we are supporting countries to convert their NDCs, especially adaptation NDCs, into implementation investment plans. These are knowledge products and toolkits that indicate areas of climate action that offer maximum financial returns for both formal and informal sector that provide livelihoods for up to 80% of the population. By this, attract NDCs implementation resources from a broad range of actors in an economy. This is a practical way that adaptation implementation financing in Africa can be mobilized and targeted for impact. That takes me to the third point. We cannot ignore Africa's power as her youth. Leveraging the youth and the informal sector for implementation is key. You can only compete from a position of strength because Africa's strength is her youth, who form 60% of the population. Another is the informal sector that engages up to 80%. We have leveraged a symbiotic approach to guide young people to retool their skills and deliver solutions that enable agricultural informal sector to adapt to the changing climate. In Uganda, for example, for instance, young people have been guided to retool their skills in developing and decentralizing affordable climate action solutions of solar dryers to agro sectors in this country. In less than 1 year, we are seeing over 2,000 households reducing post-harvest losses. And during the COVID-19 period, beneficiary communities reduced plunking losses by up to 28%, enhancing yields, enhancing earnings and incomes, and also incomes for the young people. This symbiosis created incomes to build socioeconomic resilience, to reverse post-harvest losses, and prevented erosion of ecological base. That takes me to the fourth point, which is we must leverage local governance structures. Across Africa, local governance structures trusted by communities offers an effective conduit for upscaling adaptation. For example, in the Buganda Kingdom of Uganda, ecosystem-based adaptation and clean energy solutions have been taken up within the local governance structures. Its applicability has reached many in the community, resulting in enhancing the productivity of the cassava value chain. Data that is coming out of these adaptation actions have helped to inform policy on job creation from cassava value chains and engagement of communal cooperatives, through which members invest more in these adaptation solutions. And that takes me to the last point, which is data for policy. Africa does not lack in pro-adaptation policies. The more significant gap is in a lack of implementation of policy provisions already in place. The reason is that these policies lack the much needed empirical data from the ground to inform more targeted incentives that capitalize on areas that are proven workable. African countries need to prioritize feedback mechanism to uptake data on adaptation approaches that have proven workable with ground implementers, especially in the informal sector, to further recalibrate policies to incentivize these already established workable areas. Data on the efficacy of EBA approaches on increasing yields and solar dryers in preventing aflatoxin were used from the work that UNEMA has been doing across the country to recalibrate national food standard codes in Uganda and Nigeria as affordable means for achieving compliance. The tenets I have shared cannot be actualized without the most important aspect called soft aspects. Regardless of what we do, I'm talking about inspiration and selflessness. These are the building blocks of purposeful passion, and this calls for a proper mindset that is irreplaceable in motivating us all to action. We owe ourselves the task of inspiring active and rational hope in order to drive transformational adaptation in Africa that lifts millions from the bottom of the pyramid. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Munang, for starting us off with such an impassioned and well thought out way of thinking about how to approach these issues. I hope that we can match that passion in our thinking about adaptation in Africa. We'll turn now to Dr. Gordon of the University of Ghana.
Well, thank you very much to LSE for inviting me and for Richard for making my work a lot easier, because a number of the points I'm going to make actually build on points that he has introduced. But the first thing I would like to say is that we need to change the narrative of doom and gloom that is tied to climate change. We need to change that narrative to climate change as an opportunity for us to address development challenges like post-harvest losses, like poor infrastructure, climate-proofing education, and so forth. But having said that, I would like to now go to some of the findings from the Working Group 1 of the IPCC on Africa. And basically, all the points they made are with high confidence. The fact that they're going to have more extreme events, they're going to have higher temperatures, that with an increase more rapid in Africa. They're going to have more marine heat waves. They're going to have higher sea level rise, and the frequency and intensity of heavy precipitation events are projected to increase in Africa. All of these are going to impact on people who are already living on the edge, people who are struggling from day to day in terms of subsistence. So one of the main things that we need to do is to show that adaptation in Africa will reduce vulnerability and increase the resilience of local populations. So like Richard, I have 4 points that I would like to elaborate on, which I'll do quite quickly. The first is that we need to increase climate literacy in Africa. This is tied to education. And again, the poor and vulnerable are usually those who miss out on education. But there are different ways of reaching out to people, and we need to explore all avenues, including the role of traditional authorities and traditional governance structures to reach out to people. But that is also, the low level of climate literacy is also an advantage, because we now have the opportunity to preempt the sort of disinformation that pertains in much of the Western world. We can fill that void of information with real facts rather than a false narrative. The second is something that we have failed for many years in Africa. We need to have a voice from Africa in these global assessments and these large global meetings. And one of the reasons that we don't have that voice was alluded to by Richard, in that much of the empirical evidence needed to support statements is lacking. We need a different type of researcher, a researcher that is seeing the connection between national development policy, so you can get evidence to support such policies. So we need a new set of skills in terms of how scientists, researchers interact with policymakers and with the stakeholders on the ground. The third point is that many of the approaches in adaptation currently are fragmented and are in silos. And we need to have a way of looking at adaptation in a holistic manner, bringing together the different sectors through some sort of collaborative network, not only within countries, but within regions and in the whole of Africa. I'm aware that the Economic Commission on Africa is doing such things, but we need to have a voice that looks at all the different sectors in a comprehensive manner, so that one sector will not end up being the weak link in the chain in moving us forward. The last point I'd like to make, again, Richard alluded to this, the fact that there are initiatives taking place. The cassava value chain is one example he's mentioned, but there so many of these are small scale pilots. So it is now time to mainstream, scale up and accelerate support for climate change adaptation. And if this is going to be sustainable in the long term, we need to address the issue of poverty, which reduces people's options in what they can do. We know that the adaptation costs are actually much higher than originally planned, but when you look at the cost of doing nothing, it is much higher. So it is time for African governments to invest in their people to have a better future. The last point I would make is that there is this African Adaptation Acceleration Program, and they are trying to stimulate climate resilient actions through climate smart ICT for agriculture and food security, infrastructure acceleration, and empowering youth, and innovative finance. These are all things that Richard mentioned, but it does seem that we have some sort of concerted programmatic approach to adaptation in Africa. And this is exactly what we need if we are going to use climate change as an opportunity and as a way of changing the doom and gloom narrative of throwing our arms in despair into something that is now a stepping stone to a better future for Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gordon. I really appreciate the way the two of you have set us off on such an optimistic, forward-looking kind of agenda for adaptation and climate change. I think we often do focus on the problems that Africa will be facing, differentiated problems that different parts of Africa will be facing, and I appreciate your efforts to help us see the opportunities in that. And so Timo Leiter is actually joining us from the COP, and it looks like you found a place quiet enough to talk from. So I'll turn the mic over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey, and welcome everyone from my side. Yes, I'm live here at the COP, and I hope that you can hear me well without too much background noise. In my remarks, which will absolutely build on what Richard and Chris have been saying, I will draw on the experience I've had in living and working in Tanzania and supporting the Tanzanian government on the National Adaptation Plan process between 2016 and 2019. And I also have 5 points I want to stress, which I feel are important based on this experience for Africa to adapt. The first one picks up on a point Richard made, NDCs and turning NDCs into an investment opportunity. In many countries, unfortunately, the NDCs are more like a paper tiger. So they are, somewhere else. How should I move now? Okay. Sorry for that. Because the NDCs often, even if they're ratified, are not connected to development planning. And as long as it's not mainstreamed into the actual development planning, adaptation and mitigation actions won't get the necessary budget and attention from all the line ministries. Very often so far, the NDCs are basically owned by the Environment Ministry. Second point is that often in Africa, climate projections are still lacking, which are a key part for national adaptation planning. And I'm very pleased to share that there was a huge research project called Future Climate for Africa that LSE was involved in, and which has developed climate scenarios for Tanzania and Malawi. And when I supported the development of a GCF project in Tanzania, these scenarios have been absolutely instrumental, because of the GCF, you have to make the case what the additionality on adaptation is and what the climate impacts are. So without this data, it's really difficult to do that. The third point is leadership, leadership from the top level. There are many great initiatives already under the African Union, having many heads of state involved. But my experience from living in Africa and observing the politics is that often there are still like line ministry ministers who don't necessarily have the buy-in, who still want to push development as usual, if you want, in their particular sectors. And this leads to the next point, which is the narrative, as Chris has mentioned. And this is so important. It has to be seen as an opportunity. It is still quite common to have leaders and policymakers in Africa say, no, we first have to develop and later on we can deal with climate change. But that is no longer an option. Addressing climate change is not an option. Sustainable development does absolutely require to consider the risks from climate change and to develop in a climate resilient way. So this narrative is very important. The final point, final 2 points I have is climate literacy. I absolutely agree with Chris. And also having more experts from Africa to support the development of adaptation and mitigation projects. While I was leading this work in Tanzania, it was really difficult to find experts with experience on adaptation to climate change. And if Africa doesn't want to draw on international consultants, we have to support capacity building. And I'm very pleased to report that the Pan-African University is starting a new master program, Master of Climate Change, next year, built by African institutions under the leadership of the University of Cape Town. And the final point is upscaling. That's also so important, as Chris mentioned, because so far, and we are showing this in the adaptation gap reports, and before the GCF, we had many small pilot projects, 1 million here, 1 million there, but this doesn't address systematically the underlying vulnerabilities that people face. So upscaling and larger projects as the GCF promotes, and again, really good to see that Tanzania just got its second more than $100 million project. So these are real game changers if they are done well. This is what we need. So these were the 5 points I wanted to highlight. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Timo. Thanks for persisting even in a difficult situation. As a professor of international development, I was especially glad to hear you make the link to development as well. So Svenja, you're also, I think, coming to us from the COP. It's now your turn to set out some initial thoughts on how it is that Africa might adapt to climate change.
Yeah, hello everybody. And yeah, it's a pleasure. I have to apologize. There might be also some background noises, and don't get too distracted by the beautiful background here, but I think that's kind of quite an iconic setting here at COP. So yeah, it's I'm very happy to be here, and I have prepared a couple of thoughts based on the research that I've been doing across different parts of Africa. And I think it fits in actually quite nicely with a lot of the comments that were made earlier. So hopefully we'll have a good discussion there. So the first point is, adaptation is an investment, and many of you have said that earlier, but I can't just state how important that is, because in my experience, it is still too often seen as a trade-off or a cost, and the narrative really matters. I mean, take the city of Lagos, where I've been involved in advising on flood resilience and adaptation. The city is subject to frequent flooding from coast and rainfall, and it's already a challenge, a disruptor. And we know that with sea level rise, there could be actually a scenario where millions of people who currently live or work in Lagos might be displaced. And as usual, it's the most vulnerable who are at most of risk. So, the city government in Lagos and many of the civil society organizations, they are aware, and there are positive stories of actually this idea of learning to live on the sea, with the sea. But it also creates a huge challenge when you then make decisions, for example, around infrastructure. And I guess that's the key part, how do you include adaptation and resilience into your development strategy? And how does it not become a hindrance, but part of a positive vision? And, I think there are, when you talk to people, in Lagos, for example, one of the biggest concerns are flood-related diseases and also loss of income. So it's very much a health and a social problem, as well as an infrastructure problem, and also sort of a planning problem. And I think this is key, to make adaptation part of that, what we call positive development. And we developed a tool for that. We call it the triple resilient dividend, which is very much, an approach to positive narrative, but also a tool that allows you to look at multiple benefits from adaptation and resilience. So, it's not just about reducing losses, saving lives, but there's also an economic dimension, and, there are co-benefits, social, environmental. But in order to achieve that, we need to be smart, and we also need to have adaptive capacity. And that's the next point I wanted to raise. I can't stress how important adaptive capacity is. And that is, not just an issue in countries across Africa, it's everywhere. That needs policy, environment, funding, political will, technical capacity, and, buy-in from key stakeholders. And all that is underpinned by risk information around current and future climate risk. And that sounds fairly obvious when you work in this space, but there's often an assumption you just need to provide the risk information, and then things will fall into place. Here at the Grantham Research Institute, we're working on the Future Climate for Africa program, UMFULA, which explores how climate information is used or not used on the ground by decision makers and by individuals. And that can be in an urban context, where climate information might influence how and where to build, or it could be in a rural context, about the choice of crops and the time of planting. And well, we know that poor data availability is a problem in many parts of Africa, but even where data does exist, it's often siloed. It sits within one organization. It isn't really comparable. There are lots of challenges. And we see again and again that's actually not really used decision making, and that's a really key point. And I think often this sort of false assumption, if we only have the information, things will fall into place. That's a big challenge, and we need to overcome that. And one way of overcoming, and that's the last point I want to make, is this question around incentives. What are the incentives to actually use climate risk information? And that could be around technical areas where it is about, having the right skills to use technology, but also for decision makers who might actually sometimes feel, well, if I use that data now, it just makes things more complicated, makes my life harder. And one approach that might actually help to catalyze the use of risk information, and then if you do it smartly, also trigger more adaptation, is risk finance. And it's a really complex tool. It's not a silver bullet, but I think if it's done correctly, it can help to actually catalyze a better understanding of risk and then more adaptation. And I just wanted to throw in, I'm working as part of I'm chairing the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, and we work with the V20 countries on developing risk finance solutions for those who are most vulnerable. And this can be macro or micro level, but the key is it's not really there as a short-term financial quick fix. It's there as a contributor to adaptation, to resilience. And, our work, we looked at this, for example, in the context of flood insurance in South Africa, infrastructure risk in Tanzania, and drought insurance in Malawi. It sort of opens up, possibilities, but also shows where the struggles and the challenges are. And I think, here in COP, we're talking about a lot of investments and, money that's been pledged. I think we also need to look at catalysts that can then make sure that we are actually starting to use in whatever decisions we're making, being climate smart and using information. So I think we'll hear more about this also next week here at COP. And I think, again, it's not a silver bullet, but it's one piece in the puzzle. And it can also help to bring banks and insurers across Africa to this. And I do actually a lot of work with local insurers from different African countries who kind of think that there is a role for them in this to support resilient and adaptation building. And I think that's an interesting avenue, and hopefully we can discuss this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As you can hear, all four of our speakers took rather different takes and brought really a remarkable number of ideas to the table. Svenja talking now about insurance as another kind of tool that might be used in the region for adaptation purposes. We're moving now into the second part of the event today, where I'm going to be posing a couple of questions to all of our speakers and giving them a chance to talk about the same question together. And I have two questions I think I'll pose to them. And then we'll be turning to the questions that you are starting to put into the Q&A. So as we continue to talk, please do feel free to ask your questions to the Q&A. But we'll start with one of mine. It raises a topic of finance, which came up in a number of the comments that people made, and it will obviously be crucial in Africa's adaptation to climate change. And I would like to pick up on Dr. Munang's suggestion that the finance be more targeted. So this isn't just generic money we're talking about, but maybe some targeted adaptation finance. And I've asked the group to think about if each of them could suggest one or two kinds of projects in the country or sub-region they know best, where they think targeted finance would be especially useful. And part of the purpose of this question is also to help us think more concretely about what adaptation projects are and how it is that the region might possibly respond to adaptation issues. So I think we'll just go through the presenters in the same order. And so I'll start with Dr. Munang, and then Dr. Gordon, on to Timo Leiter, and finally Svenja. So Dr. Munang, if you have some ideas about where particularly you think there could be targeted climate finance spent.
Thank you very much, Kathryn, and also to the colleagues that have shared some very amazing points. I think the point is we need to look at Africa is pretty much a real continent. And when I presented in my opening remarks, I indicated that the informal sector in Africa that actually provide 80% of the work to the informal youth, they are actually the economic locomotive of the continent. You can't wipe them out. And they are actually also those who are the most vulnerable. And if we are able to leverage on structures in communities and societies that these people are used to, and they build their social capital over time, what is called communal cooperatives, and inject adaptation finance through these structures that have been established and are owned by the community, we will make a difference. But that has not happened. And I gave the example of the Buganda Kingdom, where we're working with the Buganda Kingdom and leveraging what is called PEOSA, which is a savings organization that is in every community in the Kingdom of Buganda. And what we are doing is that we're leveraging that cooperative and delivering climate action solutions through them so that at least they can be able to add value to the agricultural products they are producing. And when they sell them, they put more money in their pockets and they plow them back to that saving. So what should happen is that adaptation financing should be leveraged as a de-risking tool and then engage these communities, communal cooperatives, so that those who are able to take finance and default, that can cover. And it will also act as an incentive, because at the same time, when you engage these communal cooperatives and engage the community, everyone will then be able to benefit and build on what has already proven to work, and that reduces risk. And these are very simple, novel approaches that have not been tapped into, and projects on adaptation financing should be able to leverage on these communal cooperatives.
Thank you. I mean, it sounds very responsive to the particular conditions of Africa as well. I think that's a really interesting response there. Dr. Gordon, where would you spend some climate finance on adaptation?
Actually, for me, that is a very easy answer. The money has to be spent on capacity building to know how to target climate finance and adaptation. The problem is that we have too many so-called experts who parachute into Africa, have a limited worldview of what is happening, and they come up with projects and initiatives which are not sustainable once the project has ended, because they have not included the socio-cultural aspect of the initiative deeply enough. Now, I'm a biophysical scientist, I'm a immunologist, ecotoxicologist, but I realize that if we are going to have transformative change, we need people with the ability to plan these things properly. And we do not have sufficient people who know how to target climate finance in a holistic, comprehensive way. So that is where I think is, for me, not only the low-hanging fruit, but is the fruit that will end up having the largest benefit in the long run. Thank you.
Sounds like an approach where you're starting perhaps with the planners and the scientists and those in the region. Timo Leiter, what's your suggestion for how we might target some adaptation finance in the country or region you know best?
Thank you. Yeah, I can absolutely underscore what Chris has just been saying. And I want to share one finding from the evaluation of the Green Climate Funds adaptation portfolio, because it found that the programming of adaptation projects, the adaptation narrative, so how does the project support adaptation, that this was the biggest bottleneck in these programs. And often the development of these projects is done by people in international organizations or people who are not in Africa or from Africa, which is a major problem. And secondly, often the project development focus is not on how the project is actually delivering adaptation, but it's about, you know, baselines and country alignment. In fact, most of the NDCs list so many sectors, it's really hard to design a project that wouldn't be aligned. So the alignment with national documents is not the problem. The question is, how does the project deliver adaptation and doing it in a sustainable way? And that is a real bottleneck. And also on where to invest, also one of the questions is how to get climate finance to go to the local level, as Richard also mentioned, rather than just staying at the national government and in national plans. There are some initiatives on this. One is the local program under the UN, which tries to link climate finance with financing for local governments who have to do a lot of the adaptation work, but often are very resource constrained. So this would be an area to target adaptation finance for. Thank you.
Thank you. An interesting observation about the need to get this money to the local level, which is, of course, where many of these impacts are. And so resources really need to be moved there as well. Svenja, where would you, what kinds of projects do you think would deserve targeted climate finance, adaptation finance?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with basically all the suggestions that have been made. And I think there's not a beauty contest of showing which one is better, but I there are two things. One is around infrastructure, and that's I just on why we can't ensure that basically investments being made today do not have resilience, but also green credentials sort of upfront there. And I think that is just unsustainable. But then a more practical aspect is local level initiatives. And I think particularly with adaptation, if you really want to have also these multiple benefits and you want to have something that actually works and you want to have ownership and you want to support communities, you need to do it locally. And there are really good examples. I mean, we're working with a lot of NGO across sort of a tool that gives the community the chance to assess their own resilience, to understand what is it, where are we strong, where are we weak, and what is it we need? And then to look at interventions, what is it, where could finance, if it comes, be sort of used most effectively? And I think I can't really see how we make progress without that sort of really local level ownership there. And I think sometimes donors find this actually too hard, and they think, oh, this is just like, we want the big money and we'll money at the national level, and then somehow they will sort it out. I think that's the wrong approach. And, that's to me a really urgent issue to make sure that that money gets channeled through and can be spent according to local needs.
Thank you for that. Certainly a very strong theme there about getting the money to the local areas. You were breaking up a little bit there, and I was imagining that probably everybody there in the COP is on their internet connections also, having meetings in and out. I think it's actually kind of interesting segue into the next question I want to ask, because it brings up technology. And especially in the area of mitigation, there's so much attention to possible technological solutions. How can we make renewable energy more reliable? How can we possibly develop whole new geoengineering solutions and things like that? And I wonder, when you look at adaptation, to what extent do you think that we also need technological solutions for adaptation? Or would you say that the solutions to adaptation are more likely to come from the social side of life rather than the technological side of life? And we'll run through you in the same order again. So Richard Minang, technology, social, where is it that we look for solutions?
Yeah, thanks again, Kathryn. I think both. The point is, my first point was that we need mitigation to power adaptation. And that is actually the biggest missing point that have existed, that adaptation is seen as a standalone and as a silo. Then that way we will only be furthering social endeavors rather than adaptation as an investment opportunity. Very practical example. Mothers across the continent grow food. Some of them apply ecosystem-based adaptation, organic farming. But when they have bumper harvest, they lose it. They are losing $48 billion US. Why? Because they cannot have a simple solar dryer, which is a mitigation technology that if it is decentralized to communities, they can then be able to dry their vegetables, dry their corn, dry fruits, and then be able to sell it. Even if they don't have a market immediately, they can be able to store it up to 6 months or so. We talk about solar fridges, which if you look across the continent, a lot of food wastage as a result of lack of storage. We talk of solar power irrigation that is needed in dry land areas. So there is absolutely no way that adaptation as a standalone, without using mitigation to power actions, can we truly make adaptation an investment opportunity. But there is one aspect that I alluded to earlier, In as much as we talk of these aspects, if we forget the soft aspect of inspiring people to see opportunities in adaptation, of making people to retool their skills which fit into the climate literacy capacity building, but more importantly, making people to become inspired and pick up these solutions, then we will have all the resources and we will not be able to have the passionate, inspired population, especially the young people, to pick up and drive these and ensure transformational development.
Thank you. That was such an, I actually was expecting that everybody would say that technology wasn't important, but you really, I think you persuaded me that there's a definite role there through mitigation. So I learned, actually I've learned a lot today, but that was definitely something that I learned that I hadn't thought about. Chris Gordon, where do you stand on this issue?
My stand is to challenge what you understand by technology. We have farmers in Africa who have developed very innovative ways of increasing productivity through on-farm management practices, which need to be shared. We have people who have home gardens, the whole concept of agrobiodiversity, where you have different types of crops which can come in at different times of the year. So when there's, in quotes, hunger, you can fall back on these so-called hunger crops. Early maturing varieties, varieties that can be kept longer, can be stored longer, are more resistant to the pest damage. I would classify all of these as technologies. Zai pits, stone buns, climate smart agriculture practices that have gone on for generations. I would say that is technology. But moving away from that, and probably going to land in the same area that Richard ended off, I think it comes down to the mindset. The mindset that we can do business as usual in the face of a very rapidly changing climate that is impacting the resilience of the peasant farmer, a climate that is impacting how we access energy, because about 70% of our energy in Africa is from biomass, and either in the form of fuel wood or charcoal. And that is also changing in terms that it's no longer as available. So how do we, let's say, introduce a technology of fuel efficient wood stoves or better ways of producing charcoal, because we are not going to be able to change that narrative right now for the millions of people in rural Africa. So what we need to do is, with small increments that are acceptable, where we can prove efficiency can change household incomes or household spending, we gradually nudge people to be less climate negative in terms of their contribution. Now, even though it has been mentioned that Africa contributes between 4 to 7% or 2 to, the figure is anywhere because we don't have the data to support it properly. When you look at planetary boundaries and tipping points, we have no idea if it is the 1% increase in emissions in Africa, which is going to cause the whole planetary system to collapse. It may be our little widow's mite, in quotes, that we put on the table, which will cause the table to fall down and we all perish with it. So we have to do whatever we can to contribute to reducing the burden of greenhouse gases, etc., on the planet. Technology will play a role, but I think issues of water conservation, energy conservation, land management, And these are not new. I mean, we are going to the issues of deep ecology, permaculture from the 1960s. But in the face of large farms, monocultures, et cetera, there's the so-called technological solutions to hunger and poverty. I think we have lost our way, or we are throwing some very good things out, which we need to maybe revisit and reassess, given the changes that are going on. Thank you.
Some very interesting observations there about just what technology is. And I think we so often look forwards for technology, but I think your point about looking backwards for some older technologies is quite interesting. Timo, what do you say?
Yeah, again, I want to underscore the important connection to mitigation, as Richard mentioned. We cannot view adaptation in isolation. The climate risk, the level of climate risk depends exactly on the level of emissions. And if we don't meet the Paris Agreement targets of 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, the climate impacts will become absolutely extreme, especially in Africa, to the point where you can't adapt. So currently the discourse is, if you just have enough finance, we can adapt. No, we can't. There are very clear limits to adaptation. So if we don't mitigate everywhere, including in Africa, we won't make it. On technology in particular, under the UNFCCC, countries are already undertaking technology needs assessments, TNAs, including for adaptation. So several countries have adaptation technology needs assessments. But again, these can become very long documents. And for water, for example, they would say rainwater harvesting. They are not, adaptation is very different from mitigation. It's not that you can just open these plans and you pick a technology and you put it somewhere. It always has to be embedded in the social context. So these documents might serve as a guide for project development to provide ideas, but not, the bottleneck for adaptation is not technologies in short. Thank you.
Thank you, and very much of a piece with your last answer too, with that ultimate coming down to the local level again. Svenja, where do you take us on this question of technologies and what we need?
Yeah, I would like to pick up on the point that Timo just made, that there are limits to adaptation. And I think we need to be very clear on that. And technology can play a huge role in also understanding, what options we have, but also how soon these options will actually run out. And I think this is an important part that is often, miscommunicated. I mean, I'm often quite worried when we're talking about, adjusting, for example, certain agricultural practices, and, we're using new technologies and so on. And I think, yes, I can see that there are lots of short-term benefits to it, but at the same time, we also know that, this is a moving feast. And, at the moment, the projections around, what we're going to face in 10 years, 15 years, and so on, are looking actually quite severe. So I think, that needs to be part of that process. And we just can't leave people with an assumption that here are some quick fixes and then put them into sort of a wrong sense of security, I think. So it's a fine balancing act, because I completely agree with what we said earlier. We also don't want to come across as, well, we're all doomed and, this is horrible. So it's a very fine balance between being realistic about the limits, but also about the positive opportunities, if you like.
Thank you. Yeah, that did sort of return us to Richard's last point too, about trying to find that optimism of the opportunities, but as you say, couched in realism as well, I think is an important kind of balancing act there. We're now going to, and I have to thank the panelists for how beautifully you have all remained exactly on time and limited in your answers, even while giving us really important information, because we were meant to have a half an hour for questions from the audience. And in fact, we have half an hour now for questions from the audience. And so we'll be turning to that. So I have some questions that are being fed to me from the audience, and I'm going to pose them. And I think what I'll suggest to our participants is that I'll read the question, and then if you'd like to be one of the people who answers the question, please turn on your camera, and then we can go through whoever has turned on their camera. So hopefully that will work, including for those of you who've got somewhat shaky internet connections. But our first question then comes from Jacob Frank, who's an LSE alumni and an intern at the United Nations Development Coordination Office. And Jacob is asking, how do you think UN country teams could support governments with climate adaptation and data gathering, things that a couple of you mentioned? So if anybody would like to answer Jacob's question, we'll start then with Chris and with whoever else turns on their camera. But go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn. And I'm a little confused now because I have been answering the questions as they've been coming through, but I don't see the answers there. So I answered Jacob by saying that the best way they can provide support is to strengthen the meteo infrastructure to collect real data, empirical data on climate in the countries. If you look at the density of weather stations in Africa, I think France has more weather stations in a single district or data collection points than the whole of West Africa. In some countries, you have 2 functional weather stations for the whole country. So because we don't have that accurate, real data over time, we tend to over-rely on models. And if you look at the global climate models on precipitation, you'll find that the range is variabilities from more than 300% in some models. So we don't know if the rainfall or the changes in the African monsoon are going to be up by 100% or down by 50%, or we have no clue. The models have improved and have been refined, but a model is only as good as the data that it is built on. And I agree also that remote sense data is now providing some of that information. But if you're an African farmer with a plot of land of 1 hectare, you don't want to be operating when you have a 1 degree square of information. You want to know what is going to happen in your particular valley or on your particular plateau. So for me, what they can do is help gather the information, the evidence that will go into the process of deciding what to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Svenja, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would like to come back to this point. I mean, I think data is obviously hugely important for this, but I think the data and the infrastructure that goes with it, you know, the weather stations, for example, are actually only as good as what you then do with the information they produce. So I think, you know, what Chris was saying there is, you know, that's one part of it, but I think don't stop the investment there, because I've seen too many projects where actually a lot of money went into developing the data infrastructure or the models or the tools, and then they sit somewhere and nobody uses it. And that's because they were designed without different users being involved. And, you know, this could be a question of, you know, they sit within one government department and nobody else knows how to access them. Or it could be that they provide information in a format that locally nobody can actually, you know, apply. So that's, I think that's the second part of, you know, the data element, and that's really often overlooked.
Thank you. Those sound like some good suggestions there. Richard, would you like to also come in on this question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. And I'll build on what Chris and Sonja have said. The point that I'm going to take it a little bit out of the norm that we've heard. Sometimes actions inform assessments. I mean, data is not just metro. Yeah, metro is very, very important. So we need a system thinking approach here, whereby If you look at the African continent, let me take West Africa and an example of what is called Zai, which is an indigenous technique that have been applied during droughts and in the Sahel. And it resulted in up to about 500% yields in 1 acre. To what extent do we leverage that data to also help inform policy? Yes, map data is important, but what about practical data? Indigenous techniques that need to be leveraged to become part and parcel of policy making and drive transformational change. To leverage metadata and leverage this indigenous knowledge and the data that has been generated combined together to make informed decision will be more solid and robust than only focusing on med. That's what I just wanted to add to that.
A very important addition. I think, yes, well taken. Reminded me a bit of the technologies answer too, of looking to some of the technologies that we already have and looking to some of the data that we already have. I think just to answer Chris Gordon's question about what we're doing with the questions here, we have some questions in the Q&A, but not so many that we can't run through them all live. So even though there are some questions there that Professor Gordon has already actually done some very useful work there in answering, we're going to go on, we're going to pose them live as well. Very interested in hearing from Professor Gordon on them then, and others who might have a question or others who might have something to respond as well. So this next one then is from Aaron Smith. What can we do to reduce natural resource export from Africa and ensure reinvestment in the continent? Does addressing global supply chains play a role in adaptation measures? So those are obviously big questions relating to trade issues and the export of resources. You want to start us off there, Chris, please?
Yeah. This is one of the questions that I didn't want to answer because it comes down to who owns the board. The person who owns the board is the person who makes the rules, and you cannot negotiate from a position of weakness. So there's basically nothing Africa can do in real terms to address the question that has been posed, because we do not determine prices, we do not determine markets. If we do not have the infrastructure to use those raw materials effectively to do that additional value, the technology and the factories that will be used to add that value will come from somewhere else. And Kathryn, if you don't mind, can I illustrate with an example? Okay, Ghana has a lot of bauxite, which is used in the production of aluminium. I think the Americans pronounce it differently, but yeah. But the process of converting bauxite to aluminium is very, very energy intensive. It goes through the phase of converting bauxite to something called alumina, and then the alumina is then smelted to form the aluminium ingots, and the ingots then have to be rolled to form the aluminium sheets so the material can be used for production. In the 1960s, there was a large dam constructed in Ghana called the Volta Dam at Akusumbo. And the purpose of that dam was to start the industry of producing or the aluminium industry, because we have bauxite. But in a very smart way, what was happening was the bauxite of Ghana would be exported to Jamaica, converted into alumina, then brought back to Ghana, where it would be changed into aluminium ingots. Those ingots would then go somewhere else, I think it was Canada, where it would be rolled into the sheets and into a form that could be used by local industry for processing. So by making sure that two vital elements of that value chain were not present in Ghana, it prevented the Ghana government of the time from, in quotes, taking over, because they didn't have all the pieces of the value chain. So there are geopolitical, there are big business interests, and I may be too cynical in saying this, but there's no interest in the industrial complex of the world in making Africa self-sufficient. And maybe I am being too cynical, because once we are self-sufficient, we don't need, and we do have the resources, we do have the intellect, but maybe it's leadership which is our problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I don't know that I think you're too cynical there. So I saw Timo first, and then we'll go to Richard from there.
Thank you. Just want to speak on the second part of the question, because adaptation is typically governed at the national level, and there has recently been a very interesting initiative to look at how risks, climate risks, are being connected to other parts of the world through trade flows. And this initiative is called Adaptation Without Borders. Because in fact, I mean, climate risks don't stop at borders. For water basins, for example, you have to govern them at the basin level. And what's really interesting, this initiative from the Stockholm Environment Institute has produced a global vulnerability map, which is not looking, as traditional maps do, at the national vulnerability, but taking into account the climate risks which are being transported, if you like, through the global trade network, through people flows. So that's something really interesting to look at, the transboundary climate risks. Thank you.
Yeah, such a difficulty of looking at just the African region when not only the climate, but also the economic system is in many ways a global phenomenon. Richard, what will you add to this?
Yeah, I think I will take a different dimension here, and I think because colleagues have already alluded to the reality of what we know. But there are certain things that can be controlled right down by the populace where they are. The continent imports food worth 35 billion and above every year because of lack of value addition. The continent is losing 68 billion every year because of land degradation. And the continent loses food worth 48 billion as a result of post-harvest losses. So let's just take a step back. Yes, without ignoring the fact that the bauxite, the cobalt, and all those, they're there. But how about focusing to then develop the value chain so that people can be lifted from the bottom of the pyramid? And then you will not only be recouping the 48 billion, but we also ensure that you can reverse the 35 billion. So we're talking 83 billion US dollars here. This is per year. What if focus was on this, whereby communities, mothers in villages, the youth can start, many of them are developing these solutions, and we put our energy there. Am I trying to say that the issue of minerals is not important? No, but how many people do minerals benefit in the continent? How many employment opportunities are created for the young people? Why don't we then build on what we have control over, so that at least once we turbocharge this bottom, we can then be able to create more opportunities that will make the top obsolete. Thank you.
Thank you for that succinct alternative vision to how things are currently. That was, very interesting. So we have a kind of related question from somebody who sounds like he could be a student in my own department, Jock Wharton, who's an LSE student. My department, the Department of International Development, is asking some questions here that I think really closely relate to what this last question raised. Can adaptation investments exist as a standalone, as distinct from development, or are these better understood as investments in development that have climate-related outcomes? So how do you see this relationship between climate and development, and is it possible to target one without targeting the other? I think is maybe the question here. Go ahead, Svenja.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I think, it depends on, who your audience is, I would say. I mean, I think, what we've just established is that adaptation needs to be seen as part of development, sustainable development. And, this idea of having adaptation and actually mitigation being part of any development strategy, that's just essential. But when it comes to then identifying where the funds come from, it is sometimes really important to distinguish. And I know that this is particularly here at COP, this is an interesting discussion. Do we actually repurpose funding. You know, we have development aid that is suddenly sort of being rebranded as adaptation finance, or do we set up additional funds? And I think this is kind of a bit of the reality, I guess, that we also, you know, we have to, unfortunately, have to play this game. And I think Timo has probably some insights because he's much closer to some of the negotiations there as well. But I mean, just to add, there's also another dimension, the loss and damage idea, that actually what happens if you can't adapt, and do we have separate funds for that? And that becomes actually a very controversial question, because it sort of touches on compensation and paying people for the losses and damages that they have already experienced. So we need to be careful, but overall, I think, you know, we can't have development without adaptation and mitigation.
And it really is, I think, probably the single biggest challenge of this COP, given that the COP in Spain didn't manage to resolve these issues about the accounting for climate finance versus development finance. So it is probably the big COP agenda. Timo, do you have something to add before we go back to Richard?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I mean, the big points here on the agenda are mitigation, getting more emission reductions. And yesterday, the methane forest stopping of deforestation conditions have been announced. That's the first big one. The second one are market mechanisms, how to account for certificates of emission reductions, and the third one, I guess, is finance, and then of course adaptation as well. But the question that the student raised is really important one that has often been debated in the literature and in policy. Adaptation and development are very closely interlinked, and adaptation ultimately aims to reduce the risk from climate change, but also increasing well-being and sustainable development. At the same time, if we would simply say, okay, we just develop and we don't consider specific climate risks, then there's a big risk that the development wouldn't effectively address climate risks. And therefore, it's really, we can't just fund regular development projects. For example, in infrastructure. The infrastructure has to take into account the future climate scenarios and to ensure that the infrastructure is resilient. So there is your adaptation component. So we couldn't simply say, okay, we don't have climate finance and we just put more money into business as usual development finance. We have to address the specific climate risks. And that is what makes a project an adaptation project. We don't need to have only standalone adaptation projects on the one side and traditional development projects on the other. Quite the opposite. There's a continuum, and all projects need to screen, are climate risks affecting them, and how can they contribute to helping the people to better respond to adaptation. That is key. And if that link isn't explained in the GCF, the Green Climate Fund would always say, well, this is just a development project, and it doesn't explain how specifically risks are being addressed.
Thank you. And Dr. Minang.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kathryn. I think colleagues have already touched most of the aspect. I think also the nomenclature or the narrative needs to be blended, and I think colleagues mentioned this. If you talk adaptation just as adaptation, it starts to alienate those who have already heard about this for 26 years. How about we talk development from opportunities and investment perspective? Let me just take a very practical example. In Africa, over 84% of energy impoverished citizens live in rural areas. In those areas, grid electricity cannot reach them, but off-grid and renewable can reach them. But these are also the people who suffer the biggest post-harvest losses. What if this clean energy is decentralized so that at least they can add value to put more money in their pocket? That part of development, they set up their enterprises and pay taxes so that at least the economic fabric can be strengthened. That's development. So to discuss development, especially adaptation and development, they are intertwined. But I think the opportunities perspective that adaptation brings should be what should be more championed and pushed forward so that development and adaptation can go one in one. Thank you.
Thanks. And Chris, you want to finish us off on this topic?
Yeah, well, I had typed my answer, the fact that we need to use a triple win approach, and I apologize to everybody for the errors in my typing, but I'm sort of listening to the conversation and typing at the same time. And at my age, it's difficult to multitask. But I always say in these things, follow the money. Follow the money. And the reason, Richard, why these small-scale off-grid things which are obvious as the solution are not being pushed by governments is the opportunities that come from a number of small grants as opposed to one big mega grant for a power station, for lots of concrete, wires, and so forth, are not as attractive to the people taking the decisions to spend money for issues of poor governance and all that entails. So when you look at how some of these decisions are being taken, you find that there's no consideration of the actual needs of the people on the ground. The decisions are made by the greed, and I don't use certain words, but let's say the things that happen in the top hierarchies in governance that prevent these very practical and workable solutions that have been mentioned from being implemented. Thank you.
Those are some pretty strong words there. And I think it points us, we've been focusing on some of the economic dimensions, but it points to the fact that there are really substantial political dimensions as well. And I'm just looking at the time and looking at the Q&A and seeing a couple of questions here together that actually pick up on this last point of Chris Gordon's. Yassine Rashid, who's an LSE Ideas alumnus from the MSc in International Strategy and Diplomacy in 2019 says, what if good governance is the real issue here? Chinese financing across the continent showed us that funding is here, but not well spent. And then there was an earlier question too from Jonathan Terefe, who says, as mentioned by the speakers, the importance of communal and local level initiatives can't be understated. However, in many cases, the state at all levels fails to include and support affected communities and their customary institutions when addressing climate change. And then asks, how do we strike the fine balance between tackling climate change without further marginalizing vulnerable groups? And I put these two together because I see them as additional questions about the role of governance and governments in helping us find the right solutions for adaptation. And I wonder if any of you have further comments you would want to make in response to these students about the question of governance, either for local groups in particular or more generally. Sanjay?
Yeah, I mean, I can give it a go. I mean, I think it's important that we realize, this is not just a finance and money problem. That it is also what then happens and how we manage and how we engage and who we involve and how we make sure that actually needs are being met and vulnerable people not ignored. And I think we have really increase our understanding of that. I mean, at the end of the day, this is about the Sustainable Development Goals. And, if you would do any investment or any project following all the Sustainable Development Goals, then you would get closer to that. But I think in reality, I mean, there was a reference to the Chinese investment and our institute has been involved in a project that was looking at these development corridors that you see funded through infrastructure investment from China, and particularly in Eastern Africa. And one aspect that we investigated there was, what's actually the role of local participation? Is there sort of a disconnect between what's being agreed between the investors, national government, and then it's just being done? And is there ownership and how are also concerns being recognized? And I think this is hugely important to avoid mistakes that we've made in the past. And there's a long list, and probably all of us can give examples where this actually went absolutely in the wrong direction. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to make actually meaningful progress if we don't actually address the governance and the sort of participation and inclusiveness aspects.
Thank you, Svenja. Yes, Chris, back to you for more on governance.
Yeah, let me follow on with the points that was made, because I had made the point about the need to have voice at the global table in global assessments, to have an African perspective and so forth. And you can only have that if you have people, negotiators who understand the system, experience and so forth. The same goes at the national level, or even the district level or regional level, sub-country level, where because of deficiencies in the education system, which again, in my cynical way, I think is deliberate, you do not have people with the understanding who can unpack the issue in the big picture. They see what is happening in the immediate, but they do not have the worldview to see the big meaning of what is being proposed by central government. And if they did, they would object very, very strongly. Now you have the so-called elites and educated people all concentrated in national capitals, but the real money is actually being spent out in rather remote areas, where, as you have just alluded, infrastructure projects which are a road from point A to point B and built to a capacity of 6 lanes of traffic. Meanwhile, the traffic that is there and is projected is not going to be more than 100 vehicles a day. But the money is being spent. Now, the way people often respond is, it is not our money, so we don't really care. But the fact is that money could have been spent in a far more useful and profitable way if local communities were consulted on what they needed themselves. And because, as I said, people sit in national governments and say, we want to have this and we want to have that, and they find a donor who's willing to give them that money, sometimes in exchange for natural resources or land in Africa, we go on doing the wrong thing. And this business as usual, I think it's Einstein who said, if you keep on doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, you are insane. So again, maybe I'm too cynical, but I think the solution to this comes from the youth that Richard alluded to. Our generation has failed. 25, 26 years of COPs, a quarter of a century. And I know there are some African negotiators who have been to every COP. We have failed. It is for the young people to come up with this new mindset, with a more holistic, comprehensive worldview, willing to speak up and say, no, we will not allow this to go on any further, and get rid of those people who are in the decision-making place without recourse to political divisions or ethnic divisions, but just based on competence. Until we do this, we are doomed to continue as we are. I said we have to have a positive outlook at the beginning, but that was in terms of how we roll out adaptation. Now, the story on governance is very different, but time will tell. Thank you.
Thank you for making that clarification. And I was thinking, he said he was going to be positive, but he's been very cynical. So Richard, you have our final word here. What can you tell us about the governance issue? And are you going to send us out on this final depressing note, or do you see some hope for better possibilities?
I think Professor Chris Gordon have laid it out very well. And I think I'll just add to that, which most of the aspects have already been touched. The governance at the central level, I mean, have issues, of course, but Africa governance is not just at the central level. I mean, there are local governance, and I keep going back to that. And these are untapped structures. These are untapped spaces that have not been used as conduits to be able to deliver adaptation, not just in terms of money, but even to tap into the human capital that have existed and can actually be coordinated. Because there are two things here that I really wanted to stress. Having money and implementing actions is one aspect. But if we want to ensure traceability and accountability, we must use institutions and structures that people trust in. And these local structures, communal cooperatives, local traditional structures that are still in place, that people have respect for them, needs to be tapped into. And it is up to us, the international community, the academic institutions and researchers, to continue to now change this narrative. And the other part that Prof touched, which is very, very important, I mean, the youth, they are energetic, vibrant, and innovative. And most of them in their different spaces are developing innovations that are actually helping mothers in villages. How do we tap into that ingenuity and not only focus on the central government, but because when the bottom works, there's absolutely no way that the top will not respond to it, because policymakers don't really buy into concepts or ideas. They love to see success and already workable examples that they can be able to get attracted towards. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think everybody will agree with me that this has been a really successful discussion of adaptation in Africa, because on the one hand, I feel like we have a better understanding of the problem itself. We've heard many interesting observations on the problem, and we've also had really useful discussion about some of the different approaches that might work, why finance is necessary but may not be enough. And then these final points that Richard was stressing, and Chris before him and others, just the crucial element of looking to the local level. Timo and Svenja brought our attention there, looking to the local level, looking to youth. These are really important places for looking for possible solutions to the issue of adaptation. So there's just, I just am very thankful to Dr. Richard Minang, Professor Chris Gordon, Dr. Svenja Serminsky, Timo Leiter, the last two coming into us from the COP. Just really, really grateful to all of you for having spent this time with us today and for giving us so many good ideas about adaptation in Africa. And hopefully these can go straight into the COP as well. And Timo says here that tomorrow they're launching the 2021 Adaptation Gap Report that both he and Chris contributed to. And hopefully next year's Adaptation Gap Report will be more adaptation and less gap, if some of the ideas from today can be brought into that discussion. So thank you very much to our audience for your penetrating questions, and thanks for joining us today, and very, very grateful to the participants for being part of this panel discussion. So without further ado, I think we'll close this off, but thank you very much, all of you.